Ba, 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 ba. Perfect. So many desktops. I need to get rid of some of these. All right. I want to do some light map work today. Not really particularly like build out a whole scene or whatnot. Like not make a whole scene be, you know, foggy and depth of field and all built out, but just look at the implementation of light maps in Bevy, look at the way that you can build them in Blender, and try to get some basic documentation down for like how to do that. So let's make Blender a little bit bigger since we'll be working with it a bit today. I'll start a new project. This will be where? I'm debating whether I want this to be in a temp directory or directly in like the Skeen docs, because that's kind of where I put content like this. I think we can put it in the docs directly if we're going to make some docs on it. I think I have to go back and actually write these docs again though, so I don't know. Maybe we'll just throw it in temp. Bevy new -t. Let's do light map Skeen. Why not? Skeen isn't really relevant. But it's hard to say no. Hey, I definitely feel you with having a lot of virtual desktops, though you're using Neary and have keybinds to jump to the workspaces you need. Nice. Yeah, I was talking about this in the off-topic channel in the Bevy Discord yesterday. I have like 15 terminals open at a given time. And each of these desktops is like a different project, right? Like desktop 6, I can see from even this little bit that it's the Rust language PDF that we've been working on, right? I know that desktop 14 is Bevy USD, right? So the USD spec kind of got released more or less. So I'm toying around with the idea of taking the grammar and throwing it into Rust and seeing what I can do with it. Like this is my project for integrating typists with my blog and hopefully potentially Rust Adventure as well. You know, this is my personal blog where I write some posts and keep notes, so that's always up. This is, I was trying to do, there's a PR up for replacing the depth pass with a different texture. And it's very much just like adding another configuration to the camera that is fairly undocumented and doesn't contain any documentation about like how to use it or why you would want it, etc. And the author doesn't seem like they want to build an example. We already have a stencil example. So I'm basically just extending the stencil example to actually use the stencil stuff. I don't know if I'm going to get to that before they merge that PR, but yeah, basically it's like it's a bunch of different projects. So I use it as like spatial memory. You just use Tmux, still having too many open projects. I can't really do it this time. Your RAM would cry even more than it does right now. Yeah, so I do run 64 gigs of RAM. And part of the reason I do that is because I work like this. So it's only an Apple M1. So it's fairly old at this point, and I have to do an upgrade at some point here soon. Maybe I'll try to wait for the M5s next year. I don't know. Are we on 5 or 6? So 5 this year and 6 next year? I don't remember. Anyway, I might try to hold out. I might end up getting a new one. I don't know. But RAM is always something that I push high. Like having a bunch of open applications is something that is fairly important to me, especially since I make content like this where I'm like, oh, I'm going to open Blender and open Photoshop and open Substance Designer and open DaVinci and open. Just having that memory around is invaluable. So let's just build this. That's not super important to us at the moment. But let's start with maybe like a plane. I'm going to scale this in edit mode up to 10. Go back to object mode, grab it on the Z plane, push it down 1. Cubes by default in Blender are 2 by 2 by 2, not 1 by 1 by 1. So this plane is actually 20 by 20. Each square is 10 by 10. Five beta just came out. Okay. You wish it were easier to just push all processes of a project to disk and restore them later. I was literally saying that yesterday. My friend was telling me that so Zalige is one option for doing that kind of thing. I have a bunch of like layouts, I would say. Let's pull this all the way over here. Open yet another terminal. So in my Zalige layouts directory, I have a bunch of layouts. Let's try to open the specific one in general. So I have .code workspace and .kdl here. These are two interrelated files. The KDL file ends up being like a bunch of effectively Tmux config. If you're familiar with Tmux. What directory I'm in, what the default tab is going to be, where the tabs are, how they're split. And then one of the really interesting things is actually that, well, that's my database connection, this. So you can open panes inside of tabs that are like single run. So they close when the process is done. So I use that. So if I open Zalige right now, I don't think I have it open. Maybe I can demo it. Question is, do I have This Week in Bevy running on the left-hand side right now, or did I shut it down? So if I do like Zalige L This Week in Bevy.kdl, this pops up my terminal, pops up my VS Code, asks me for my password confirmation set to every 16 days. I'm not going to type my password in on stream. But usually I can just hit my finger if it's within the 2 weeks. And now I have a bunch of, This Week in Bevy stuff here. This is part of how I insert data. So this is the actual web server that runs the site. This is a bunch of tools that I use for like uploading images and optimizing things and pulling in various like pull requests and issue data and stuff like that. And then my database is usually running here, etc. And I can just quit that if I want to. And then I have all the code here in the VS Code and whatever. So like I can restore stuff pretty well, but I have to do, it's a lot of setup. You just now realize you always pronounce it Zelgi? I think it's Zalige. I've made videos on it, and the person who makes the project has seen those videos, so I hope they would have corrected me if I said it wrong. I should make another Zalige video at some point. Hey Anders, how's it going? Rainy Sweden. I do like rainy. I think I was in Stockholm at one point over a Christmas break, and it was like reasonably rainy, and it was kind of nice. I had Pest on screen a second ago. What are you using Pest for? How do you think it compares to Chomsky? I am going to say that I do not like the approach of using Peg. That is what I'm going to say. Pest is a great project. If you have a PEG grammar and you need to use that PEG grammar, Pest is a great project. That's why I'm using Pest. I do not like PEG grammars. I do not like using them inside of Rust. They don't have the type safety that I want from a parser. For example, I got to find that demo parser project somewhere. I thought I had it in the Rust Adventure repos, but I don't think I ever pushed it. Oh, you know what? It's in my Advent of Code repo. It's in my personal Advent of Code repo, is what it is. Hang on, I actually have this. Repos. Advent of Code getting cut down to about 12 days this year. So it's going to be like December 1st through 12th. I do it every year. People on the channel might know, or people in chat might know. Don't think it's this one. But it's only going to be 12 days this year. Here we go. Here's a bunch of things. So I've got nom, I've got winnow, I've got regex, I've got nom supreme, I've got pest, etc. And here's the grammar for one of the projects for like a PEG grammar, right? First of all, I find this kind of hard to read. That's a personal thing. I think it's fine, but I find it personally hard to read. I do like that it's a separate file. They have a little playground on the site, which is super nice. So like I could pull this in, throw this into, where's their playground? Their playground's somewhere around here. Throw this here. And then I think I have, maybe I scraped my input. Tests. Okay, here's the input for this particular parser. So you do end up with like a parse, right? And in this case, it's like 1 game per line, yada, yada. But then the way you have to interact with this data once you pull it into Rust, if I remember correctly, is like really kind of not fun. Those are the types. Pestintro.rs, I think. Yeah, so there's so much possibility of failure in the pest parser that you end up not having enough data to know if data is supposed to be there or not. And like I could see how this would be useful for, I guess, if you wanted to output diagnostics for things missing or whatever, but it means that you have like the pest stuff and then you have like a bunch of potentially missing data inside of the actual Rust structures. If you remember correctly, there's a derive macro for pest. Should make it more safe by binding expressions to types. Did I ever get around to that, or is that new? Derive parser, grammar, struct. At this point, it's been 2 years since I really looked at what Pest had to offer. So my information might be a little bit out of date, but I don't really see it here. You're looking for, like there's parses 2. Parser, input, rule, tokens. This is a test parser. Yeah, testing tool. Not sure which sure which macro you're talking about. Parser macro maybe has a derived macro. Struct module. Yeah, not seeing it. Not super important either. But yeah, my experience is basically like there's too much ambiguity here. When I have a parser, I want it to like come in as the thing that I expected it to parse as or fail. When you compare Pest to other PEG parsers, you think it has the best looks, especially compared to Python options. I do think Pest is a great, right? Like if I was looking for a PEG parser, which I was for this project, because this project is, I don't know if I answered what this was for when you asked. This is the USD spec. So I don't know that everybody knows what USD is. We're talking about Lightmaps today, so maybe we go and talk about USD for a second. Universal scene description. This is like a format kind of out of Pixar that the industry is kind of pushing forward together, that hasn't gotten a spec yet, but is getting a spec. Which is very cool. And I'm interested in seeing if we can work with it in some way. But up until this point of which the spec gets released, it's just like a giant C library. And when I say giant, I mean like really big. So now there's a PEG grammar for a bunch of stuff, which we could potentially use to kickstart like experiments in using USD, maybe with Bevy. I don't really love the idea of using PEG long-term, or maybe there's a layer on top of this that does the translation from struct to struct or whatever. But anyway, that's what I'm using Pest for over here. This is a USD parser. What else was I saying? Oh, the other thing that I was saying was Yabai. Right, I use Yabai for my window management, which means that I have the ability to query what windows are on what desktops through Yabai. Where's the queries? Commands, space commands, querying information. So I can query displays and query spaces and query windows and get a bunch of information out of those things and then use those to build like a little KDL file or something. And then potentially use that to reboot the whole situation. So if I can like take this information, dump it into a KDL file in like a Zalige format, and then let Zalige open everything back up, I think that could be a workflow that works for me. And then I can start closing things out more often. Because I'll have basically just a directory of like Zalige projects that I can reopen. We'll see. It means that I have to build that myself, which is not necessarily what I want to do with my time at the moment. Pest derive seems to be a thing. Like a separate crate, right? Yeah. Parsing returns an iterator of nested token pairs. I feel like this is one of the things that I didn't like about PEG in general. I don't know. I can look into this though. It would be really nice to be able to take the PEG grammar that they have, dump it into some like automated pipeline, and then end up with something that produces like reasonable Rust structs. But we'll see. I don't know if they haven't actually released that yet. That's kind of just like a preview thing. It's like, hey, we think we have something here. Here's a bunch of Python code. Here's a bunch of tests. So at least they gave like a bunch of USDA files. So if you write a parser, you can definitely check it against like the repo. But the spec isn't officially released yet. Okay, Lightmaps. Let's get this into a GLTF file. We'll do regular GLTF today. Nothing too compressed or anything. I'm leaning towards telling people to use GLTF over GLB for a couple of different reasons. One of which is people don't really know what's in a GLTF file. Like they don't realize it's JSON. And having a GLTF file, especially in development, makes it easier for people to like actually debug. The other thing is that if you use a GLTF file, all the images get pushed out to their own locations in the Git repo, which makes it easier to do source control. And I'm not entirely convinced that there's a lot of benefit to doing like a GLB. I know there's extra compression and stuff, and it's like a binary file format and whatever, but I don't know. I think the default state I might push to is people using GLTF. It's what I use in all of my demos too. Where's Lightmap? My temp projects directory is getting really big. Oh god, I got a kayak thing in here. Oh, it's literally been years since I dumped this directory. The last time I cleaned out my temp directory was before 2023. Lightmap scheme, assets. So here we will do, I guess I'll just override demo.gltf. So we'll run this. It will have basically nothing. We will export GLTF one more time. And this time we're going to use cameras and punctual lights as the two things that we export. And that gives us a this camera right here inside of Blender, this light here inside of Blender, pointing at this cube, right? So if we can set active camera, this is the view that we're getting in our Bevy application. So like I could do features Bevy file watcher here. I feel like it's unfortunate that that causes 30 Bevy things to recompile. I wonder if we can shorten that. Probably not though, because if you enable file watcher, I feel like that has to touch a lot of the crates. Okay, so we will end up with this. I don't know, maybe we put another cube in here. Maybe an icosphere. Actually, let's not do anything too complicated just yet. Let's grab another cube, I think. NG, no Z. So this is like over here. And like maybe I scale this down a little bit. And I don't think we have a directional light in the scene right now or anything like that. So this is our setup. We've got a camera, we've got a light, we've got two boxes and a plane. And the goal is to get light maps. I guess while this is compiling, I can talk about Lightmaps a little bit. We could also run the Lightmap. I think we have a Lightmap demo. So Lightmaps, basically an image handle and some UVs. That's what we need to get out of Blender. And to do that, basically what we're going to do is create an image in the shaders, hook up the UVs to it, and then create a second set of UVs for each of our objects that we want to bake the image for. And then we have to bake that image and hope it gets output into somewhere we can use. I've done light baking separately. There is no GLTF light map like extension. So this may turn into something where I write like a Bevy light map GLTF extension or something. And that's where we store the data. I think it would be nice if you could just kind of hit like bake or whatever and get everything to work. Right now, you kind of have to put all the pieces together yourself. So export. And I placed it a little bit in the wrong spot, but it's over here on the left. So if we don't include lights, this little light here, let's do, there's no shadows on this light either, is the other thing. I don't think we can enable shadows on this point light inside of Blender. We would have to use a component. So this would have to like have point light on it. I think we would have to actually put it on the interior thing on the light, but maybe not. Let's see. Variant, alpha, range, shadow. So shadow's enabled. Theoretically, this ideally would result in, oh, there we go. Perfect. There used to be a bug where that didn't work. This is very cool to have file watching working for scenes. I think Andre fixed that. So thank you, Andre. So yeah, Andre fixed that. And this is just, it's so nice. It's so nice. Oh, right. This is the demo that I did. Forgot about this. I'm just like putting a bunch of stuff there and hitting export. Cool that these components work now. This shadow option on this component didn't used to work. Cool. So I'm not sure if this is going to mess with us at all, but I guess we'll keep going with it. We can always turn lights off for the export. So let's also bring up on another desktop. Yay! Isn't everybody so happy? So our GLTF here has KHR likes punctual at the moment. These are real-time lights. This has a component on it with a bunch of point light stuff. We've got a scene with a couple of nodes inside of it. This is 3 cubes, a light, and a camera, right? Cube, light, camera, plane, cube. 5 items. More desktops. That's what I should have as a chat redeem, just more desktops. Every time chat redeems a thing, we get another desktop. That would be ridiculous. Okay, so we've got a camera, we've got yada yada, we've got stuff and things. We don't have anything super interesting here. We don't have any textures. We don't have anything like that. Do we want textures is a question in my head. This is going to look, I think, a little bit weird without textures. Maybe we pull something in from one of the other projects. I have this in like Rust Adventure, Bevy examples, layered materials. Assets, and then these are processed arrays and process single. I wonder if we can even use the KTX files here like this, just directly. I think that we can start off with just using the PNG. I'm not really planning on committing this at the moment, so let's go to the plane. Let's go to the material. If I can scroll to the right tab, shading. Actually, what I want to do here is grab the color. I don't think we want either of the other things. Color, depth, and roughness. I don't think roughness has anything in it. Normal does. Let's do color and normal for grass. And then here we will dump those two things in. So we have these two files here. I don't know that we want these to be in that directory. Actually, now that I think about it. Let's make another directory. Like raw assets. And then we'll take these two and we'll put them in raw assets. Because what's going to happen is we're going to pull them into Blender. And then they're going to get like re-exported again. So here we have, I think, what is it? Command Shift T, Option Command T. What is the hotkey? Did we put a material on this already? I already forgot. No, we didn't. Here's a material. That's why that's not working. So I think this is Command Shift T, Command Option T. One of these is the right key combo that I need to hit. Why is that not working? Hang on. Let me figure that out because that's something useful. Blender, hotkey, import PBR textures. Yada yada. Control-Alt-T. That's the one I didn't try. Control-Alt-T. Control-Shift-T. Principal texture setup. Yes. Control-Shift-T. All right. As if I needed more difficulty. Why that didn't come up into the directory that I wanted it to, I don't know. We're going to have to go find the directory again. Where's my name? Temp, Lightmaps. assets raw, these two, bring them in. And what that does is basically just sets up the textures into the principal BSDF. So now this has grass. You can also do that manually. You don't need to do it with the hotkey or whatever. And now we have grass. So we have something that looks a little bit more interesting. It's not like particularly super exciting, but it's something that's a little bit better. We can also stick like an environment map light and stuff in here, but I just didn't want like a flat plane, literally a flat plane. So ideally, we want to create some light maps here and use them inside of Bevy. Texture coordinates. I think we're going to have to specify our UVs. Where's the UV map? UVs come from the texture coordinates. We don't have a UV map for the texture coordinates, do we? Does this even matter? I don't think that matters at all, does it? That's a beautiful export dialog box. Thank you, Blender. Yeah, so I think we're good there. So we only have one UV map right now. I think we need a second. So where's our object data? Modifiers, physics, constraints, data. Vertex groups, shape keys, UV maps. Here's our UV map. This is the one that we can see in the little drop down here. I unfortunately think I'm going to have a hard time showing this without either zooming in way too far so that nothing can be seen, or, you know, it's just, there's a lot on screen. We've got UV map here and UV map here. We need another UV map. Technically for the plane, I don't think it'll really matter. But we'll call this like UV map 1, UV map light map. Right now we have UV map and UV map light map, and this needs to have a output, or rather, I guess an input. We need an image is what we need. Image sequence, image texture. We need an image texture. And this UV is going to go into this vector. This is going to be the UV light map. So the second set of light maps, or the second set of UVs, sorry. Where is Chrome? I always lose Chrome. If you look at the light map component here, it says that if the mesh has a second UV layer, which is attribute UV1, which is the attribute UV that we just created in Blender, then the light map will render using those UVs. So this is like a texture that is per object. So for our plane, we have the UVs that are being used for the texture coordinates and the UVs that are being used for the light map application. This doesn't really do much for us on a plane, but it could have more impact if we ever wanted to, let's say, pack a bunch of light maps into the same texture, which is totally a thing that people can do. let's say create a new image. We need to name this something. Let's call this like plane.lightmap. 1024 by 1024 is fine. I don't really see a reason to go high resolution right now. You can go as high resolution as you want, but you know, it is what it is. Okay. Other options, linear, projection, repeat, generated, color space, sRGB. I don't know that that's the right color space for us. But I think it's fine for now. I don't think there's anything that mentions that in the docs. Right, just the light map texture. So one of the interesting things about these are that they can be HDR, which is realistically probably what we want at some point, but we'll go with just like a regular sRGB and see what it does. So we have a plain light map and we have a UV map going into it. These UVs, I don't even think matter, if I'm being honest, in the final export. So like disconnecting these doesn't do anything. The way that Blender exports this principal BSDF to GLTF is effectively like with restrictions, right? So there are nodes that if you try to use them inside of a shader like this, will not actually export. So like if I implemented something here, took something from shader and was like, here is a, I don't know, a volume scatter node. Like a volume scatter node isn't going to be used in the export. Like that won't come through with the BSDF. So we have UV, double UVs. We've got a place for our light map texture. We do not have the light map texture yet. It is just a black image. So let's do an export. And we should, I'm going to go back through all of my, like our example application is still working, which is great. And if we look at the assets, we don't see anything just yet. So we've got assets raw and grass graph and stuff like that, right? This we have to bake into. Right, so we've got this image inside of our like Blender file. I don't know if we need a fake user this actually. But we need to bake it. I think I have a baking add-on here that we might be able to take advantage of. QBaker. Oh yeah, I forgot I installed this. Yeah, let's install the ND asset library. Thank you. I've also got Treebox. I don't know how to pronounce this. I thought it was UCU paint, but I don't think it is. So bake groups for this. See if we can line this up to the right thing. Sheen, bevel, cavity, curvature. Cavity and curvature are really interesting textures. Create material, AGX, PNG. I don't think this is actually going to help us, which is really unfortunate. Get rid of that bake group, I guess. collection object. I thought I was going to be able to bake pretty much anything arbitrarily, but maybe not. Maybe I have to go look at the docs. The Lightmapper is what I've used in the past. The Lightmapper, unfortunately, last I checked, hasn't seen a commit in a while. About 10 months. But I was able to actually get this to work and use it, and it was kind of nice. Let's go Blender docs. I know there's a docs page. Baking. Bake geometry nodes. UV operators light map pack. I don't think I've seen that actually. Oh, cool. So if we do a UV unwrap for that second UV, this is a method of doing UV unwrapping specifically for light maps to take better advantage of the space, which is very cool. This is all UV stuff though. I swear I've seen this documentation page before. Why? These are not the docs pages that I wanted. Probes, indirect lighting, volumetrics, depth of field, screen space, ray tracing, shader nodes, CPU rendering. Do I have this open in another browser tab already? I swear I was looking at this like pre-stream and I closed the tab out and I shouldn't have closed the tab out. Maybe I had it on my other computer. Let me just check for a second. Yes, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. What? Render baking. That's what it's called. Why that didn't show up? Render baking. This page. Cycle shaders and lighting can be baked to image textures. This is what we want. Baking textures like base color normal maps for game engine export, baking ambient occlusion or procedural textures. Yada yada, creating light maps to provide global illumination or speed up rendering in games. Baking requires a mesh to have a UV map. We already set that up. And either a color attribute or an image texture node with an image to be baked to. So we have the UV map. We have that texture. Bring this all the way back so I don't. This setup. UV map into texture that we're going to bake to. There's a number of different sources you can select when doing this baking. So reference, render, bake. Setup, settings. Where's this panel? That's hilarious. Where do you think this panel is? Render, bake. Rendering. I think we want to switch to cycles. I think this isn't going to show in Render samples, advanced, threshold, clamping. I think we need to go to cycles to see this. Lights, light tree, sample subset. There's bake. So here's bake, available in cycles. And if we look at this, it doesn't show up for Eevee. So it's important to realize that if you use the wrong rendering engine, you will never find this panel. So this bake type combined versus a bunch of other stuff. View from above surface. Direct and indirect lighting, diffuse glossy transmission and emission. Bake to the active color attribute on meshes, bake to image data, blocks with associated image data. This is the thing that I'm like hesitant about. It's basically like it uses the active texture. So I think I have to like have this selected here and then move over to rendering, which is why everybody uses like third-party baking tools, stuff like this. So image textures, margins, size. Let's just hit bake and see what happens. Let's say it's going to take 12 hours. I don't have any idea what was going on there, but here is theoretically a light bake for a plain.lightmap. Right? We've got a completely dead spot in the middle. We've got some shadows. And then we've got, because the cube on the left is lifted up a bit, we actually don't get a fully black spot here. Whereas this cube is directly on the plane mesh, so it is completely black. So we should have this image now. Question is, how do we get that to export? And once it's exported, how do we actually access it? Because as you can see here, there is no image coming out. So place reload, edit externally. We can save this individually. Again, this is part of the reason that people use third-party baking tools, because nobody wants to do this over and over like I'm doing right now. So this goes into assets. This is plain.lightmap.png. We're just going to save it there. So we have plain.lightmap.png now. And for now, we're going to do this manually. So how do I want to do this? I want to go to main. We've got an on-scene instance ready. Let's do, what do we do? Let's remove the lights from the export. So let's file export, don't include punctual lights. So that when we run this, we actually end up with an unlit scene. Right? No light. And then we want to take our, move this over here, our light map and stuff, and make actual use of it. So the question is, how do we do that? I think we have a couple options. The easiest one by far is going to be, I think, query for what? GLTF mesh name. I think this is a thing. We have GLTF material name. I think we also have mesh name. Rust Analyzer having some issues. Why is Rust Analyzer having some issues? Yeah, Bevy GLTF mesh name. Was I able to do that before Rust Analyzer actually figured it out? Cool. I don't know what's going on with Rust Analyzer right now. So for entity and children, iter descendants. I think I'm going to iter descendants here just because like we're spawning a scene and we want to attach it to the right thing. This then would be, let's call this like GLTF meshes. And this would be name. We probably want entity here too, because we're going to insert the lightmap component is what we're going to do. I do want to do is some and, but I don't want to. All right, let's just do like name. What dot zero equals plane, I think is what we called it in Blender. Let's go to layout. This is called plane on the mesh. So if name equals plane, print the name and the entity, I think, is what we do to start. So we found GLTF mesh name, plane, entity 40. That's good. That's what we need. So on this then, entity.insert lightmap, which I think is going to mostly be defaulted, except for the image, which is going to be an asset server .load for this arbitrary file that we've named plain lightmap.png, I think. I've learned so much from this stream. Wow, now GLTF does not seem like a magic black box, and I know why hot reloading the scene was not working. Nice. I'm so happy that this is useful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them, but that's definitely why I do this on stream. Commands, let's do asset server. Asset server. Yeah, GLTF is literally just a bunch of JSON in a file, right? So if we take a look at the JSON in here, literally just JSON in a file. Like, here's the default scenes, default scene 0. This is an index into this array specifically. So the default scene happens to be this one, this object. This scene has a bunch of children that are nodes 0, 1, 2, and 3. Nodes 0, 1, 2, and 3 are indexes into this array. This array, node 0 is a cube. Node 1 is the camera, 2 is the plane, and 3 is the second cube, right? And they've all got translations. And you can imagine, again, this mesh ID, if you go down to meshes, is going to be one of these meshes. It's like the format itself is very simple to follow if you have the opportunity to look inside it. Which is also the reason, well, we don't have the light in here anyway, but the reason that Skeen like doesn't impact anything is because on every one of these you can have like extras, which is just like a string. Literally just explained what pointer is. I guess, yeah. I feel like that's an analogy for a pointer, but yeah. I try not to say the word pointer because it freaks people out, honestly. People who come from like C and are dealing with pointers, it's fine. They already know. And they'll do what you just did, which is like, oh, that's what a pointer is. I know what a pointer is. If you say pointer to somebody who like writes Ruby, Python, or like JavaScript or something, they're like, I don't know what a pointer is. Why do I need to know what a pointer is? I've never needed to know what a pointer is. So I think actually all we need to do is introduce this component, but I'm not fully certain that that fully configures it. So let me go and check for the Lightmap demo that I know exists in the Bevy repo. And this is going to be in, I haven't looked at this in a while. I don't think it's in shaders. We don't have a lights directory. Maybe it's just 3D. Lightmaps. There we go. So this is turning off the global ambient light. Is that an option? No, it's just turning off the global ambient light. So maybe we turn off the global ambient light too. Spawns a Cornell box. If you've never seen a Cornell box, that is this thing. These two boxes next to each other with the red and the green on either side. So we could theoretically like build a Cornell box in Blender and export that scene instead. Maybe I'll do that for the demo for Skeen. Depth, motion, deferred. We're not using deferred. I don't think we need to use deferred. See, light map image, bicubic sampling. And then light map exposure is the other setting. So standard material light map exposure. The exposure brightness of the light map if present. So if we look at the default, I think this is going to be a default of 0. It's 1. Cool. That's interesting. We're going to mess with that color though. So we're going to do, let's see. What is this? Mesh material 3D, standard material. And this is going to be matte handle. And then we need to access the materials, right? Which needs to be mutable because we're going to mutate this. Res mute assets, standard material. So we're going to basically just grab the handle here if we're in the right spot, which is going to be here. Maybe we can do this after we insert. So materials, because we're here, it will have the mesh. Like we just queried for things that have the mesh. So if this didn't for some reason, we would be in deep trouble is the way that I'll frame it. So I'm just going to unwrap this. And I don't yeah, this is actually an exclusive reference. So we just get to do lightmap exposure. And let's set this to something like ridiculous, right? Like 100. So that's not doing anything for us. And we need to figure out why. My impression is that that light map is not getting used at the moment. Oh, exposure 250? That's even bigger than, okay. Maybe 100 is too small. They use 250. Let's go for 250. And then a ridiculously jacked up version of that would be like 2500, right? And now you can actually see the light starting to be there. I don't know how high I have to jack this up to be like way too much. But we've got our light map, right? There's no light in this scene. You can tell there's no light in this scene because the cubes are not lit. So this is what a light map does for you, right? It's a texture that you can apply to this plane that you can pre-bake out of Blender that gives you like shadows on these cubes, right? If we move the cubes, these shadows stay in the same place. This is a ridiculous value that you would never use, I believe. Let's move the cube. Wait, no, let's not move the cube. Let's move the cube in Blender, I guess. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to Shift Z and like move it over here, which I think we should be able to view from the camera. Yeah, so it'll be over there. We're just going to export. We'll rerun this if I don't mess up the source code instead of running it. And look, the cube moved, but the shadow didn't, right? We pre-baked all the lighting information. So it's not actually being calculated. It's just being added to what's there. So let's dump this back out so we get our stuff in the right spot. Cool. Let's take a little bit of a deeper look at the code they're using here. Our light map is fairly low resolution. It's 1024 by 1024. You could totally make that bigger if you needed to, for whatever reason. We could put light maps on each of the cubes as well. There isn't a whole lot of value currently in us doing that, but we also don't have any lighting inside of Bevy. Let's turn the global ambient light off because I think that'll make it darker. We have a default ambient light, right? You know what? This just got split on main. We need to go to the release 0.17 branch. This global ambient light, I think resources as entities might have just gotten merged. In any case, the ambient light got split. So to turn off the ambient light in 0.17, it's ambient light, but in 0. Whatchamacallit, on main, it's going to be global ambient light. So if we turn the ambient light off, now there is literally zero light hitting these cubes because the only light that we had before that was hitting these cubes was coming from the ambient light. So now our cubes are just in total darkness and our grass looks like it's fully lit. Let's see, they don't do anything else interesting in here, do they? They actually have a Cornell box with the light map. And they're basically doing the same thing here. So the same way that we are, when this loads in, looking for the name of the mesh to apply the light map to. In the demo in Bevy, they are also iterating over all these materials and meshes and picking the names out to then insert the light map onto. So we happen to take the same approach here. I don't know that that's the approach that I would want to take long term. I feel like I would want to modify the scene world if I had a bunch of light maps, so that when I spawned it in, all the light maps were just there. But doing scene instance ready, or I guess add light maps to meshes, which runs, when does this run? In update. So this just runs all the time. This runs all the time? Is this just continually inserting? Args, meshes. That's weird, right? Default, startup, update, run. This is just constantly inserting the component, isn't it? This runs every update. Commands, asset server, meshes. It doesn't remove anything and it doesn't stop. I think this demo is just constantly inserting this component every frame. I'm going to make a note of that to check that later, and maybe put in a PR for changing that factoid. Because that's, I mean, it's probably not bad for the demo, but oh, without light map, there we go. Okay, never mind. This only does the query for things that don't have a light map component. So it is running every frame, but it's not doing the insert every frame. Because anything that has the light map is not getting processed, which is a good way to do it. Cool. There's really not, I think, a whole lot else to light maps. The big thing about light maps is making them can be a pain. I guess bicubic sampling, right? And like figuring out how to make them is also kind of a pain. That's just a true or false, right? I'm curious about the difference between the two that shows. See if we can look at the edges of this shadow, maybe. It's a little blurry, but not particularly terrible. And then false. Doesn't have much of a difference, if I'm being honest, for our use case, but maybe it would have more of a difference later. So it's checking for a light map on every update. How costly are those checks? It is querying specifically for, let me bring up the code. It is doing a query here, right? And it's querying for these meshes. Let me make this bigger so people can actually see it. So what's happening is this, come on, GitHub. What's happening is this variable is this query. This query queries for every entity with a GLTF mesh name and a mesh material 3D standard material. Also with a mesh 3D and that doesn't have the light map, right? So if you make this query and you iterate over it not at all, the query is basically costless. Like it doesn't matter. If you do a query and there are no items, you can treat that as costless as well. The way these queries work, I believe in this case, the filters are archetype filters. Let's check to see if we can confirm that. Filter that selects entities without a component T, query without permit. It doesn't say. It is archetypal. True. So what you're doing here is effectively filtering the archetypes, which means that what you're doing is you have a whole chunk of like memory, contiguous memory, that is all of the entities that have these specific components. And to iterate over them, you're just churning through that chunk of memory. I may have missed my words there. I'm not like an ECS internals expert, but my understanding is that because this is an archetypal query, and because things are stored in those archetypes, that if you do a without component, you're basically doing an archetype filter, and there are far fewer archetypes in general than there are like entities in the world. So you're filtering on far fewer things. And everything with like the subset of those components gets selected by that archetype filter, and then it's just a contiguous like burn through all the entities. So I would say that they're not costly. But as always, I would say they're not costly relative to the application code that I'm writing. But it's always a matter of perspective, right? Are you looking from the perspective of I'm writing Bevy application code, in which case they are not really costly? Are you looking from the perspective of an ECS internals developer, in which case you might think of them as costly, even though for an application developer, it doesn't matter? I think that's one of the things that whenever people come into even the Bevy Discord or any other Discord, and they go, is this performant or not, is basically the question. It's like, some people will say yes, some people will say no, and it's because they're looking at it from different angles, right? Which is why I always try to encourage people to use quantifiable values when they're saying something is more or less performant, which is why I always push people towards profiling their use cases. Because if you just say something is slow, that can mean that it doesn't run in nanoseconds, it runs in microseconds, or it doesn't run in microseconds, it runs in, a millisecond, or it doesn't run in a millisecond, it runs in 2 seconds. Like, a slow network request is different from a slow database access, right? Those are two different, like, very different granularities. Anyway, I hope that helped. But what I believe is happening there is that it's filtering based on the archetypes. And thus, this filter is actually not very costly. The most of the cost of a query comes from when you're iterating over it. So if you were iterating over every entity in like a very wide grouping of archetypes, that would be the cost of iterating over everything. Let's see. Wish there was a little bit more guidance on lightmap exposure. I feel like lightmap exposure is 600 here. Yada, yada, yada. See, this one uses a value of 10,000 for its light map exposure. So I think we have these in constants, actually. Right? So if we take like, instead of doing random 6,000 here, we do lux, which should come from Bevy light, light constants lux. And then we can use ambient daylight here. This should look like it's roughly daytime, which I think is like 10K. It is daytime with like a single point light, so it does look a little bit weird. This isn't like a full directional light on everything. And we have no environment light, right? Let's do full moon at night, which is very different, right? And then I guess like in an office, theoretically, this is a rug carpet in an office, right? So you can kind of see the carpet, but not really. So let's see. There's a couple of things I would really like to do here. I don't know that I'm going to do them all on stream. One of the things is doing all of that setup is fairly intense. I would like to find a better workflow for, let me write this over on my, like a Blender light map generation workflow, right? And I want to start with just doing light maps for individual objects. I don't want to pack them. I don't want to do anything. I just want to make it possible for people to start using light maps. So maybe the first thing I do is a video. I guess I can pull this over here. Let me... So I want to do a video on Blender light map basics. My fear with doing this video is that it basically shows the simplest, most verbose way of doing this. And if it doesn't show like an easy way to do it, then it'll kind of like turn people off to doing it at all. I want to improve the Blender light map generation workflow, or at least find one. I don't think I have to write most of this. I think that I'll be able to find like a baking tool that works well. For example, we have QBaker. Could we have used QBaker over here to bake our actual texture? Right? High to low, global maps. This is PBR, alpha, height map, wireframe stuff. BSDF. This is cycles, UV, transmission, position, environment, diffuse. Combined. Actually, combined is what we had. Combined is what we had. So can we do... Here's all the options. Okay, so we can use QBaker. Let me do... let's see. This is a little bit awkward because I don't know which object this is on currently. Can I add cube, add cube? Cube 1 doesn't have a material assigned. Cube 1 needs a material. Let's grab a random material on cube 1. Let's make the random material, I don't know, like a greenish color. Doesn't matter. This one we'll make like a bluish color. Arbitrary. And then let's also do plane. So now we have cube, cube 1, and plane. We have a bake group for that. We have UVmap.lightmap, I think is what we want to use. This says add a new UV map. Global UV map? No, I don't think we want a global UV map. So for plane, we want to use UVmap.lightmap. For each of these, we also want to set up our new UV maps. Actually, are these global? I didn't think those were global. Hang on. Let me back up my Blender knowledge for a second. Blender UV map. Don't need mesh analysis. This is not the UV map information that I'm looking for. Editing UVs. If you add a UV, a second UV, does that add the slot to everything? That's what I'm really interested in at the moment. Blender's default name is UV map. I guess it does. I'm going to have to look this up later. I'm going to make a note for myself to confirm this, because that's something that I need to be. Is second UV map global? I actually don't know the answer, so I'll have to figure that out. We're about to use it, so I guess if we do global UV map, it's always use this one, right? So these all have it. I don't think QBaker inserted that when I selected it earlier, but maybe it did. I'll have to play around with it a little bit. So combined, yada yada, global bake. What is this? Same bake settings for all the bake groups. That's cool. Color management, color depth, compression. Okay, let me bake these and see what happens. I don't think that QBaker is necessarily going to be the thing that I suggest doing, but if it's as easy as add all the objects you want to bake for, it will be easy for me to document it and be like, if you're using QBaker, just add these and dump it. I would really love in general to not have to build additional tooling. There are people who build tools like baking that are dedicated just to building tools for baking, etc. And I would love to take advantage of the Blender ecosystem to be able to do this. So there is that, and we have no kind of exported images. So the question is, we've baked, and now what? Shading, animation, rendering, geometry nodes, compositing. This is the light map that we did earlier, image editor. Not properties. Blender file, images. And in here we have bake 1K combined. Can I pick the bake 1K combined? Okay, so this is absolutely not what we want in terms of like the output. So let's go back in here. Let's not do a global bake and let's hit bake and hope that we get individual images. This says create a material for the baked textures. I am curious to know if this is modifying my materials at the moment. F bake groups baked. Maybe we don't need this, but we do need a fake user. I think that's the F there. Because if we don't have a fake user, then we have issues. Okay, that's plain light map. This is bake 1K combined. Viewer node. I think that we're not getting the output that I want here. Properties. I want this to go to multiple images. So if I select global maps and we do combined, do I need to do this now on everything? No. Just playing with QBaker a little bit. Go shading. Not seeing what I want to see. Let's see if I can go QBaker images. Nope, I do mean QBaker. Nope, I do not mean cookies. Quick Baker. Texture set. Advertises multi-texture set. I think that's just different. The thing that I would really want to do here is not have to set it up individually for every object. I think it's okay to set it up individually for every object. It's just not what I want to be doing. It says texture set. It's all in the same image. I don't want it in the same image. I don't want UDIMs. Channel packing is interesting, but not what we want. Oh, you can bake vertex color for material ID? That's really cool. Node bake. Maps. Not sure here. FAQ, no FAQs. Documentation. Just some YouTube video. Unfortunate. Unfortunate that there is not a documentation site for this. There are, let's see, a Superhive, I think is what they are called these days. We can go bake. There is also Simple Bake. I think Simple Bake is another one that I've seen a bunch of people use. Just simple baking. The definitive baking solution. You can bake all the traditional cycles bake modes along with other kind of specialist maps, ambient occlusion, etc. Bunch of in-depth tutorials. Is there a export to a variety of file formats, yada yada. There's no free version, so I can't download and try without buying, which I'm not going to do on stream. Baking is too slow. Bake maps to target for high poly to low poly workflows. That's cool. Not a lot of documentation for these tools, unfortunately. Maybe one of the others has better documentation that I can point people to. I don't know. You can definitely do it without paying anything, like we showed before, but it would be nice to have like an automated setup, right? Like the two things we need are UV maps for everything, right? That light map UV map, and we need the cycles bake to a texture for everything. Maybe global UV map isn't what I should have chosen. I want this to output multiple files is what I want. Maybe I have to hit the plus icon here. Bake group 1K combined. Combined is not the name because it's combining. It's combined because these are going to be settings, I guess. Can add an output folder. Where's temp? Temp, Lightmaps. Assets, add folder. For some reason, the lack of documentation in some Blender community thing. A lot of stuff is in some random YouTube videos. Well, Blender is a very visual ecosystem, right? Whereas Bevy is a very code and code-driven ecosystem, but with the backing culture of Rust and Cargo providing documentation for that code means that the Rust ecosystem has a predilection for writing documentation for code, and a lot of programmers like to read documentation. Blender is very much a click this, click that, there's a checkbox over here, drag this over here, insert a cube, move it over there, like select these three vertices kind of application, for which visual media makes a lot more sense. So it's not surprising actually that there isn't as much written documentation, because for Blender and how visual it is, and like you see the same thing with people who come to Bevy and they want like a game engine editor, right? Like a 3D environment to do level design in. It can be tough to mentally visualize what you're supposed to be doing in 3D space, in the same way that it can be tough to mentally visualize where things are in a Blender application, especially when there are, 10 tabs for different purposes and it does so much stuff. So videos are not necessarily, it's not necessarily outside of the realm of expectation, right? I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm just not going to watch a video on stream. If there was written documentation, it would be easier for me on stream. But that's not really the priority for people producing that stuff. Okay, assets. Here's Bake Group. This is one file. I need to figure out how to get this into multiple files is really what I need. I guess the other thing I could do here is bake group object, bake group object, and then theoretically I can bake everything. But this requires specifying what we want on every bake group, which is unfortunate. Right. I don't know if there's like a bake all bake groups thing. All right, so we've got bake group 2. Bake group 2 should only have the 1 cube now. Yeah, so here's 1 cube, here's another cube. And then I can't multi-select this, which is unfortunate. You have to remember to set all these options for each thing. It's unfortunate. But it would make it nicer if you were trying to do a single light map for everything, right? That's one thing that you could do. If I click the documentation, is it just going to be quick start and workflow? Object bake, hide below. Okay. Bake group is the start of the add-on. Add a new bake group. Shift and plus. High poly to low poly. This looks like it's creating 3 different bake groups for the 3 different objects. So you kind of have to set this up for every individual object is what it's looking like to me. It seems kind of centered around not making a single texture, but making a single texture set, if that makes more sense, right? Like in this example, there's albedo, AO, metallic, normal, roughness, baking out all of these maps for one set of objects. So I think that's just the workflow for QBaker. So it's just, that's how it is. I hope that there is a, let's see, is there a command here? QBaker background bake? Just hit background bake? Nope. I'm not particularly supposed to call these individually. Was just kind of hoping it would work. Oh, you can have presets, which is nice. I think the bake group names are a little bit awkward because I want them to be associated, but that's fine. So what are we missing? We're missing bake group, let's see, bake group 1, bake group 2. We're missing bake group. Right, this is cube 1. This should be plain. There are nice things about this because you don't necessarily want to rebake everything, and figuring out what to rebake is kind of a process, but sitting here and clicking bake 3 times is not really what I want to do with my time either. So I hope there's a bake all button, or maybe I'll find a different plugin that I'll suggest to people. So we've got bake group 1, bake group 2. These unfortunately have kind of awful naming conventions. So we can't really use these to scoop up the light maps. But we could definitely use them in general. The naming convention needs work. Because right now it would just be hard coded. So there's got to be another workflow, right? Because right now it's this, right? If plain, then whatever. Let's do, I guess, a match on name.0 here. And we'll do plain goes to, what was it, bake group 1. Copy relative path, so it'll be this. In this case, this is basically what we need to do for everything. This is going to be as stir, right? We can do here? Yeah. No. As deref. What's the problem with as stir? Oh, as stir because it doesn't have a reference on the front, right? What am I doing here? Oh, it's because I'm not handling everything. That's fine. Right. We'll just continue if we don't find one. But here we need a couple of things. We need cube and cube dot 001. This is cube and this is cube dot 001, right? So ideally there would be some kind of manifest file that defines this and defines the locations that you're baking out to. And then ideally you can bring in the GLTF file in the manifest, which hopefully we could stick into the extras in the GLTF file. That would be really cool. If we can stick it into the GLTF extras inside of Blender somehow, then we can stick that directly into like Lightmap components. I think the first thing I'm going to do is document how to do it without any special tooling, but then also build special tooling over time. That's kind of what I did with Skeen as well. So let's do this dot includes. I always forget if it's includes or contains. Name.0, comma. I always forget if it includes or contains, but this is my general like favored pattern for stir with the fur. Okay, so this theoretically should have, when we boot it back up, light maps for all 3 of our objects. Invalid accessor UVB is really interesting. So that we're getting 2 of those, which means that I feel like even though this said it had a UVB, it actually doesn't. Or did we not export this? I might not have exported this after we started messing with stuff. I think that's it, yeah. That looks a little bit weird. We've got a green cube on the left, blue cube on the right. We've got a little bit of a something or other going on that corner. What is going on here? For some reason, Mac has decided to get rid of the like minimize buttons. I don't know if these are the right light maps. Let me check. So green on the left, blue on the right. Cube 1 should be the green one. So that should be bake group 1. Cube 1 should be bake group. Oh, these are all the same bake group. That's why, because I didn't change them. That's the problem with having them all so similarly named. So this is bake group 1. Copy relative path. This is bake group 2. And then we run this. And this, nope, that is still the wrong bake group, isn't it? Bake group 1. Give me the bake group 2, please. Bake group 2. There we go. So we've got light maps for all 3 of these. And we now have in what is effectively a completely unlit scene, right? There's no ambient occlusion, or ambient occlusion. There's no ambient light. There's no point light. There's no spotlight. There's no directional light. This is just like a thing that exists. We have basically got fake lighting, which is just so cool in my mind. So if we do like ambient daylight, we've got like high quality baked lighting on everything, which is just so cool. Like this is, I don't know if anybody else finds this interesting, honestly, but I find this like just incredibly cool. So realistically, the workflow here is add UV, set up the bake, click the button to bake, link it in code. I think the linking it in code part always has to happen. The baking in Blender part can have some workflow improvements, etc. But yeah, I don't know. I'm satisfied with this. This feels good. This is so cool. Like that just looks so good. And it's so simple to get it to look that good, right? Like I feel like we end up with a lot of we end up with a lot of Bevy applications that use like ambient light, no environment map, no special light setups, no fog, no distance, no tons of things. And it's just because they don't know how to bake stuff. Because it can be complicated, especially if you don't know what Blender is. But if you can put the elbow grease in, you can get something that looks really good in Bevy. I believe that additionally, if we look at the documentation for things like point light, this has effects light mapped mesh diffuse on it. So let's grab a point light and move it around the scene to interact with the light map stuff. Commands.spawn, point light. Let's get the defaults in here, I guess. Let's stick a transform on it. I don't think I'm actually going to be using the transform per se. I think I'm going to set this in a system, so I'm not really worried about it. And here we want the effects light map mesh diffuse to be true. And we probably want to also set the intensity to something. And we probably want to set it to something that is pretty intense overall. So let's call it raw sunlight for now. Not that that's a good idea, but it'll show us that there's an actual difference. But the file names and clicking a lot of stuff is kind of upsetting. Yeah, so the way that this works overall, right? The way that better workflows get built is exactly what I'm doing here, right? So we spend, I don't know, we spent about 2 hours just looking through various Blender settings and workflows and seeing what the current state of the world is like, what actually needs to happen, and walking through the manual setup. This is the most manual setup this will ever be, right? So what I was mentioning before, do I have my little note thing here? What I was mentioning before is that there's a process here to go from where we are now to a better workflow. And we could go from either end, really, right? We could go from the end of like, it would be nice to just have like a bake button in Blender, right? From a user experience perspective. But if we have a bake button, then we need a should bake checkbox. And as you kind of scale up the advanced use cases, we have to think about block compression. We have to think about hacking light maps together, right? And the further you get along kind of the advanced workflow, the more you're going to want to do manually. But we can definitely have like a should bake checkbox in the Skeen checkboxes and a bake button for baking. And then Skeen can go through all of the meshes that have that checkbox, make sure they have their UVs set up, make sure they have like a specially named texture, and then run cycles via Python to export all of those textures with the right names, right? And you wouldn't get a lot of control necessarily over this. It would just be like whatever we decided to offer through Skeen. But it would be like an easy bake button, right? And we'll call this we'll call it an easy bake Bevy, right? So yes, it's very manual right now, but everything that we did manually just then is achievable through Python scripting. So when we talk about what Skeen can offer, right? Skeen can basically build this easy bake Bevy button, right? Bake light maps as a click. And we could set this, like there's a number of considerations here, even with the very simple, like scene or object level, right? Like, do we bake everything in this particular scene or do we bake everything for these objects, etc.? We want to dump out that metadata file, right? These images are not going to be stored in the GLTF by default. So can we put the images in GLTF, right? Because if we can put the images in GLTF, then I believe we can use references to those to set up the components. So we can automatically set up light map components. So the idea here being that there's a spectrum of easy to advanced use cases. There's a spectrum of doing it manually to doing it fully automatically. And it's very easy to see a point where the clicking around through Blender to set all these checkboxes. All of that is possible via Python, and all of the setup in Bevy is possible via observers. So it's very conceivable that I take an hour or two, I build out a very basic workflow here. It runs cycles for you or whatever. Maybe it's not maybe it doesn't give you progress indication as well as it could. But it sends out all of these images into this Blender file. When you export your GLTF, we make sure that those images, if they're baked, come with, and then it's all automatic, right? You basically just say, I'm using Skeen, so I'm going to check or uncheck whether I want this lighting baked. And then the images go and we set them up for you. And then you just have light maps, right? So yeah, I mean, like the file names and clicking for a lot of stuff is kind of like not the way that I would do a large scale level per se, but we can make this very automated, right? We can break it down to basically like, do you want to safe list or block list things? Are these things going to move by default or be static by default is kind of the indicator there. And then we basically just say, hit the bake button. We'll go through. We'll make sure all of these things have their second UV set. We'll make sure that they all get images that are in the blend file. It bakes cycles to all of the images, which we can call automatically. And then we can shove those into the GLTF output. We can reference those when we're doing a GLTF import in Bevy. And that all happens in code automatically. And all you had to do was decide whether something was going to get a bake or not and hit the button. That's how this like grows into something that people can do very easily. One of the things that I like to encourage in general is using tools that already exist in the ecosystem. Unfortunately, the baker that I currently have installed, QBaker, doesn't do this effectively. Right? Because really what we want here is to be able to say, for all of these images, or for all of these meshes, bake a light map. And it seems like to me that we have to set up a bake group for each one, which is unfortunate. And then once you set up a bake group to each one, you still have to kind of manually connect those back. So, I mean, this works really well if you are an advanced user. And like, if I wanted to say these two cubes should be in the same light map, right? I can put them both into the same bake group. I can set up their UVs to be in different places. And then I can use those UVs to bake them into this light map and then use the same light map for both of them. That's an advanced use case that's served by this tool. And probably not one that we're going to like build into a first offering from Skeen, for example. So from my perspective, I do a bunch of content and teaching people about how things work, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is probably a video on the basics, right? How does this work? How do you get it to work? Just the raw, like it needs to have this UV map. It needs to have this texture. You need to be able to bake this from cycles into that texture. Once you have this texture, you can save it somewhere. Once you save it somewhere, you can then use it inside of Bevy. Here's how the light maps work inside of Bevy. And then once people have like that basic understanding, the higher level tool comes out of doing that work. What was I gonna do? Oh, right, the point light. I get distracted. Okay, so point light, we only have one point light. So let's do a, I guess move point light. Mute query, query, and mute transform with point light, right? And I guess we can single this for now. I personally don't really love using single because like theoretically it doesn't matter that there's one point light, right? So like for light in mute query in this case, like we have a mute transform, we need res time, and we're going to do light dot x or dot light dot translation, sorry, dot x equals time dot sine, time dot elapsed seconds dot sine times 10, I think. This isn't going to be a circle or anything special. This is just going to be a... I usually like to do an infinity sign, actually. That's my personal desire. The problem is I always forget what the setup is for the infinity sign. It's like sine and cosine. So here's our point light coming through, just moving back and forth. Not super interesting. These materials obviously are like shiny, you can see, which is a whole other thing. So if we go into materials, if we go into our, this is our grass, no, this is not a grass material. Let's get rid of this bake stuff. Let's go to the plain material, roughness. Let's stick the roughness all the way up. Let's export. And this is significantly less shiny on the ground, right? This is also a very bright light is the other way that I'll put it. Right, this is like, I think we set this intensity to direct sunlight. So it is a little bit weird. But you can see it interact with all these shadows. So we've got a real point light moving around the scene, interacting with light mapped materials from Blender. Can I do cosine? Is it just as easy as cosine? No, it is sine. And what, negative cosine? We probably want the roughness down on these other two as well, just for the demo. Or up, I should say. Right, there's no reason for us to have kind of like 50% roughness on random cubes. Oh, I think this is also really low, isn't it? I didn't put it in the air at all. Hang on. From XYZ, 0, let's say 0, 5. I think this is the 2-unit tall cube, right? So let's put it above the cube. Let's make it 0. Should probably have just spawned a sphere in where the point light is. So it was running around the ground before, and now it's a little bit more subtle. We can bring it back down to like 2, so it kind of goes directly into the cube, maybe a little bit closer. Could also crank the intensity up a little bit more. And you can see it now coming over the top of this edge. X equals cosine, y is sine times 2. That sounds about right. X equals cosine, sine times, I guess 10 times 2, because that's the way that I'm kind of increasing the amplitude. Why did I set that to y? I don't know. That was very silly. That's one of the things that happens to my brain when I do Blender to Bevy stuff, is the coordinate conversion. Our light is way over there in the distance right now. Let's do something a little bit closer, like 3. So the light is moving around. Still a little bit hard to see. We should probably bump the intensity of the point light. We have it at raw sunlight though. What do we have the light map on? We have the light map pretty high too, right? Ambient daylight. We could bump the intensity of the environment map down if we wanted to. So it's kind of cool because you can see the light map side of the cube that is facing away from the original point light is super dark and the other two aren't. So we still get like kind of a high quality light. I wouldn't necessarily say this is like the effect that you should go for, right? Like if you have a point light on one side and then you like start shining light or whatever. But it is cool that when the point light comes around and actually does start shining light on that side, that it lights up just like the other sides do. So yeah, light maps. Also, hey, Purple G. I mean, you're right about X and Y. That is the way that the cosine and sine show up on like a graph, right? I should have translated into Z. Anyway, this is super cool to me. I could literally watch lights travel all day. This is supposed to be really intense, but the radius isn't that high. So maybe we set the radius to like 5. And you can kind of see it happening on the edge there. And then did we... I turned the bicubic sampling off. So let's turn the bicubic sampling back on. It's kind of cool. I think this light is literally in the ground. That's why it seems like such a harsh edge. We could always pull the camera back too. But I'm hoping to build this into Skeen. G, ZZ, back it up. Export. I guess I could have done this inside of the running application. I don't know why I stopped it. But yeah, there's like you could build out a whole level with some high quality lighting by using these light maps. Now the like number of textures you're using overall goes up. And then you get into like how and if you pack them and compress them and stuff. But I think as an ecosystem right now, getting people from 0 to using light maps at all is really what I want to get to. I feel like vast majority of people are not currently using light maps. We had some conversations in off topic yesterday about light maps in general, and why people use certain tools. And I would really like to make it easier for people to access light maps in arbitrary applications. So not opting into any particular tool, like not needing to use Blender or whatever, but kind of explaining to people what light maps are. So if they want to use a different tool, they can pick, whatever they want, and they still understand how light maps work and can, figure out how to bake them. You just need to use Blender GLTF more in general, to be honest. I could make more Blender videos. If that was a thing that people were interested in. I don't do a lot of like Blender specific stuff. I would probably be Blender in relation to Bevy at some point, but there is something to be said for like the documentation for skiing over time basically turns into how to use Blender. Right? Like there's a page on how to use Blender drivers. There's a page on how to use like collection instances. There's like, how do you export it all? Etc. So like, I think there's a lot of stuff in the skiing repo. I create all these issues, but documentation is really what I'm looking for here. So here's all the documentation stuff that I have on my docket to actually document. Like what kinds of materials can be exported, how do you work with colliders if you want to visualize them, how to use decals in general, exporting cameras and lights like we just did, using components to build UI in Blender, using scene spawner instead of scene root, hot reload and how that's supposed to work. I guess this is done. This works now in 0.17. But yeah, coordinate systems. At some point, it just turns into like, how do you use Blender at all? Like if I'm going to talk about light map baking, it's going to be like, how do you use Blender? Because there's really not that much for the Bevy side of things. The Bevy side of things is like, insert the light map component with the light map that you baked. Like, cool. There's not much there other than like, how do you get to that entity and how do you insert it? But like, how do you do the baking and stuff is all Blender side. I think that's good for today. I'm going to go back to doing some scripting and stuff. I want to write more for the video that I want to ship this week, and I want to just kind of like sit down and crank through it. So I think I have error handling, control flow, pattern matching. I have to hit generics and traits and iterators, and then, yeah. Is there a significant performance boost when using light maps? So light maps, the trade-off here is basically, if you do lighting at real time, there are performance considerations to doing lighting in real time, right? And you can't have too many intersecting lights in real time. So really the performance hit is from having a lot of real lights. I know Chain Boom ran into this when they were trying to do their last jam entry. So that's Jan's project. But basically, the more lights you have and the more overlap there is between them, the more of a performance hit you're going to end up having. So the fewer lights that you need to render, the better your performance is going to be. If you have a lot of static stuff, you can bake all that lighting information to the textures. And then instead of doing lighting calculations for everything, you're doing a texture sample. So that's the performance trade-off. You're trading off like real-time lighting shader logic for a single texture sample. So there should be, for people who are using heavily lit scenes, switching lights to light maps should boost performance in general. The downside is that they are static for the most part, right? Like the thing we're seeing here where are we? Let's boost this back up to like ambient daylight. The thing we're seeing here where these shadows exist, right? Those shadows will always exist there. It doesn't matter where these cubes go, because they are like cubes, right? They're just meshes. So we could move the cubes, but if we move the cubes, then those shadows are still going to be there. That's the trade-off with Lightmaps. You get higher performance because it's just texture samples, but as a result, you are literally baking light information into a texture, right? It's not dynamic. On the other end, you can do something like Solari, which is kind of like heavily intense and stuff like that. But yeah, I would say that if you have a heavily lit scene, light maps are definitely something you should look into. So the answer is yes, there's a significant performance boost. But with that, I think I'm going to call it for today. I'll be back tomorrow streaming again. Maybe doing Rust language stuff. I don't know. We might pick another Bevy thing. I have some layered material stuff that I'm doing for Bevy that I would like to finish. There's some other stuff too. Maybe we'll do some Bevy workshops. So if anybody has any things they would want to see on stream, let me know in Discord, assuming that my little bot is still running. And otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day, y'all.